So now that you've learned a little bit about what data science is, let's talk about where data science is now. Here's the usual objectives slide. Please pause and read over this slide before proceeding. The first thing I want to tell you about data science is that other fields are concerned that data scientists will replace them. In 2015, the two primary actuarial societies in the US put out a report on an actuarial employment study regarding the situation in North America. One of the highlights in the executive summary of the report is quoted right here. Specifically, the report points out that actuaries don't have enough knowledge or experience with the tools of predictive modeling, and that statisticians and computer scientists have been sought out to fill these roles. It also mentions that actuaries that have a few years of experience with predictive modeling or working with large data sets are hard to find. As recently as 2019, the American Statistical Association released a report called Statistics at a Crossroads: Who is for the Challenge? A quote from this report is below. The first sentence speaks for itself. Statisticians are concerned that they will become irrelevant as data science becomes more established. Now, you're probably wondering why all this concern. As you may recall from a prior lecture, I mentioned that many statisticians claim that there is no difference between statistics and data science. To understand this, I think one needs to assess how academics versus industry professionals approach data science. Full disclaimer, in case you didn't know, I was an industry professional before I started teaching DSci 2000. My route to teaching was by no means traditional. I had been in the position of working full-time while doing graduate school part-time, and thus, as I was learning graduate-level statistics, I was also seeing how such techniques were applied immediately in industry. Most people do not take this route to graduate school. In fact, the impression that I get is that it's expected that one would do graduate school full-time without any additional commitments. My opinion on industry versus academia is that neither side is really correct in how data science should be approached. My opinion is that industry professionals and academics need to work together to really see successful implementation of data science in both industry and academia. Industry professionals and academics, in my opinion, could really learn a lot from each other. I'll elaborate on this in a bit later. To start with the academic side, there's usually a large emphasis on machine learning. Admittedly, the quote below comes from a biased source to illustrate this point, but I think it illustrates how well industry professionals are seeing that students who graduate from data science programs enter industry jobs with a different sense of what a data job entails than what is the reality. In addition to this, academic data science programs are usually derivative of a business, math, stats, or computer science department, or some combination of the four. I point this out specifically because a lot of academics teach data science much like they would approach how they've approached subjects they've taught in the past, usually with a bottom-up approach. The last thing I want to point out is where academia is headed with regard to data science, trying to figure out how to educate students about the subject, and on the research side of academia, focus on cutting-edge topics such as explainable AI or high-dimensional statistics. But one thing to note, that just because cutting-edge topics are of emphasis in academia, it does not mean there are actually jobs in these areas. This was a Reddit thread posted near the end of 2019, where people are mentioning that decent machine learning graduates, unless they have multiple PhDs, are not obtaining machine learning positions. Long story short, there are a ton of students who are graduating wanting to do cutting-edge machine learning work. The impression I get from this thread is that in machine learning, the supply of candidates who want cutting-edge machine learning jobs is soon to, or may already, exceed the number of jobs that exist in cutting-edge machine learning. Now, from my perspective, I do not work in cutting-edge machine learning, so I do not have the expertise to assess the validity of this claim. However, actuarial science was experiencing something similar about 5 or so years ago, and people claim now that it is oversaturated with entry-level candidates, so there is a precedent. This is really to say, whatever is emphasized in academic data science isn't necessarily where the jobs are in industry, and it's a good example of where industry and academia unfortunately differ. Now let's talk about industry work in data science. In industry, the focus isn't really on machine learning. Rather, in industry, organizations are really still trying to figure out what data is really about. Keep in mind that I'm not talking about what are popularly known as the FANGs, i.e., Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. Yes, these companies are quite mature when it comes to their use of technology and data, but most companies aren't at the level of a FANG. This is important for you to keep in mind as a student. While media reports may popularize AI and data science coming out of a FANG, this is by no means representative of a typical company outside of Silicon Valley. In industry, organizations often have a desire to become data-driven, but don't really know what that means or how to get there. As I mentioned in a prior lecture, most management do not have the technical background to understand what best practices in data look like. On top of this, based on polling in a Women in Data conference in the UK, most data scientists plan on leaving their current jobs in 2020 due to a lack of support from managers and bureaucracy. And lastly, in most companies, according to the Harvard Business Review, data do not meet basic quality standards. So to summarize, here's what we're dealing with here. Actuarial science and statistics are concerned that they will both become irrelevant. Academics tend to focus on cutting-edge methods in AI and machine learning, and industry professionals are focusing on how to incorporate data into general business strategy and best practices for working with data. How do we reconcile the differences of these different worlds? Here's how I personally deal with these differences. In this class, I put my primary emphasis on teaching you all on how to get data in a manageable format. If you want to learn cutting-edge machine learning, you can deal with that after you've taken more math and CS. In my professional work, I always emphasize the implications that theory has on what I do in my work. I'll give you a little taste of this in a future lecture. As a student, you need to be aware that these differences exist. Please let me know if you have any questions through email or Discord.